Today I'm going to share my experience raising game funding with Kickstarter. I had a little experience doing crowdfunding for non-game projects years ago, but nothing very significant. For each game in my series of grid-based dungeon crawlers, which you could call gridders, blobbers, and DRPGs if you're into specific terminology, I've run a Kickstarter campaign. 2 funded successfully and 1 did not. For each campaign, I had pretty modest goals, with the idea that exposing the games to a larger audience was more important than the money itself. For the first campaign, Into the Inferno, I hadn't published a game yet and wanted to raise a modest sum to put toward improving the graphics. I set the goal at $750, an amount that would be nice to have, but not so much that the game wouldn't happen without it. I had absolute 0 followers, 0 published games, and 0 credibility going into it. The game did not look great, but it did at least look like there was a game. It was playable-ish, but far from complete at the time of the campaign. I did my best and put a lot of effort into promotion and regular updates. Ultimately, it did fund, but really only thanks to my mom chipping in a bit. Thanks, Mom. There were 16 backers, and some of them went on to be my most active and loyal players, whose feedback helped a lot in improving the game and its sequels. For my second Kickstarter, the second game in the series, Crossing the Sands, I increased the amount I was trying to raise to $1,000. Going into this one, I had more confidence. I had published the first game, plus another small roguelike called Beast Dungeon that I mentioned in another video, proving that I could finish and ship a game. I had a lot of reusable code and systems, had more skills, and a more solid vision of what I was going to build, with more of the world mapped out. Although it didn't sell a lot, there were at least a few people who played the first game and would be interested in playing a second one. Visually, the game was a little better than the first one, but still not much to look at. You can call it ugly if you want, especially the interface. Since then it's improved a lot, but on launch day it was not a big improvement over Into the Inferno. Again, I put a lot into the campaign and had a working early demo available. It did fun, really only thanks to my mom chipping in again. Thanks, Mom. There were 24 backers, 50% more than the first game, and everything went a lot more smoothly, with me needing to invest less time to get a greater result. For the third game in the series, Navigating the Labyrinth, I increased the campaign size yet again with a goal of $1,500. Going into this one, I had leveled up my skills considerably. I had 4 games shipped, 2 of which were in this series, and the graphics and user interface looked a whole lot nicer than the first 2 games did when I launched their campaigns. My audience and player base were also bigger. Since the last campaign's backers grew by 50%, it seemed reasonable that this one might also grow by 50%. Again, I put just as much into the campaign as the 2 others. This one did not fund, even with my mom chipping in a little. There were 28 backers, 16% more than the previous game, but it wasn't enough. This was really disappointing given how much the gameplay and visuals had evolved over the life of the series. It was even more disappointing because this unsuccessful campaign was just as much work as the successful ones, but I got nothing out of it, other than maybe a handful of wish lists. Going into it, I had plans for both success and failure. It mainly came down to buying less art and stretching and adapting the things I already acquired a bit more. So why did the third one fail? Well, this requires zooming out a bit to see the bigger picture. First of all, grid-based dungeon crawlers are a very niche genre, especially if you narrow them down to ones with turn-based combat, which excludes things like Legends of Grimrock. I don't enjoy real-time combat at all in a party-based crawler, so I wouldn't build a game that had it, and if I did, I wouldn't be able to do it well. This leaves games like Wizardry, recent games being The 5 Ordeals and Labyrinth of Lost Souls, each of which had about 400 reviews, and The Proving Grounds of the Mad Overlord remake. So at the high end, it's possible to sell 15,000 or even 30,000 copies. Among indie games, 68K Studios has The Seventh Circle and Ludus Mortis, with about 60 reviews each. Jetatura has 18. At the high end, there's Legends of Amberland, the first one having 200 reviews, and the second one having 100 or so. Typical performance for a reasonably good indie game looks like it's between 500 and 8,000 copies then. 8,000 copies is great. I could live pretty well on that for a year. 500 copies is not. I've been a game developer for less than 2 years now, and it would be unreasonable to expect me to hit the top end of the indie space with this level of experience. If we go with the logarithmic mean, it's entirely reasonable that I might be able to sell 3,000 copies of each new game with 2 or 3 years more experience. Given taxes, fees, regional pricing, and discounts, that's not enough for me to live on for a year, even with the lower cost of living in Latin America. It's pretty close. I could probably make 4,000 copies work. But if a good game by an experienced developer cannot be expected to reach a living wage when it performs reasonably well, that's not a good genre to work in. I had ideas sketched out for 8 games in this series, with names for a few more beyond that. Unless the next game is a huge hit that changes my mind, I think old school DRPGs have run their course for me, after Toward the Ice. Of course, I am still going to release that one, but it's not going to be my next project. I realized the dream and made the games 12-year-old me always wanted to make. That's awesome. But I also have to make a living, so that's going to be it for retro crawlers. I love role-playing games, and I'll definitely be making more of them, but they'll be something a bit more modern. There are so many games to be inspired by, like the Divinity, Dragon Age, Baldur's Gate, Pathfinder, Elder Scrolls, Kingdom Come, and even the Souls-like games. To make those, that brings me to my second point. I am not good enough yet. My programming is awesome. There's nothing to be ashamed of there. After more than 30 years of writing code, if I can think it, I can code it in any of 3 languages. I could get better at sound design and soundtrack composing. I'm not too bad, and I've been a musician for around 20 of the last 30 years or so. You know, with long breaks. I'm still getting used to the audio of games, but it's not something that's holding me back. I'm reasonably decent at user interfaces, and that's another thing I have a bunch of experience with, mainly from building desktop apps for a long time, but I could still improve. That's another thing that I'm getting used to with game development, but isn't really holding me back. My biggest weakness is visuals, art direction, 3D graphics, modeling, sculpting, lighting, animation, visual effects. All of these are things that I either don't know well or at all. It makes sense. Most of my game-related experience is with text-only multi-user dungeons, a bit of ASCII art and 2D icons. 3D really is new for me. Any sane person would team up with a kick-ass artist. I don't know any kick-ass artists with nothing better to do, and I'm unlikely to meet any in the near future. Maybe I would meet a few if I worked at a game studio for a while, and maybe there would be a point in the future where we'd start a project together. That could be nice. For now, that's not going to happen. So what I've been doing for now is learning Unreal Engine. It's easier to make the same game with the same models look better in Unreal. I've gone through a ton of classes covering as many aspects as possible, and recently posted 2 Steam wishlist pages, one for a 2D space survivors-like called Eridani Survivors, and one for a Diablo-like RPG called Necromaster. Check out Necromaster, it's going to be pretty sweet when it's done. I've also been planning to learn Blender well, but I've only honestly spent a few hours with it because I've been so focused on learning Unreal. What might happen in an interesting timeline is if I get good enough at Unreal and manage to release some games with it, I could end up working for a studio for a while to level up, and then come back to doing my own thing after the training montage finishes. I don't know. For now, it's just grinding experience and trying to level up. It hurts and I feel dumb, but that's what I can do for now.